Brett, how does diversity helps human beings, and has it helped the U.S.?
Whether or not it's helped, I don't know. I'm not qualified to do
You've
any
traveled
studies.
the world and you've seen
Well,
a lot of diversity.
I've gone around, yeah, but I haven't done any studies to know whether or not it has helped. I know that historically, certain cultures or certain groups of people have been either just eradicated, or the culture has been suppressed, or there have been coercive movements from the government to try to force assimilation. For example, the 1934 Indian Reorganization Act. Yay, Roosevelt! That act, the stated purpose was to force Native Americans to assimilate into American culture. And the biggest reason they wanted to do that was so that they could put the land, which is part of a sovereign nation, make it part of the U.S. so they can tax it. That's a very silly reason to do things. That was also when Native Americans got citizenship. Prior to that bill, a Native American born on a reservation did not automatically get U.S. citizenship. They had to be naturalized like any other foreigner coming from a foreign country. They have always been treated as a foreign country. And most people don't even understand they're not part of the state that they're in to this day. And the government has sought to relocate people. What's known as the five civilized tribes, Cherokee, Chickasaw, and three others that I don't remember, were in Georgia. Gold was found on their land. They wanted to relocate them. The Cherokee sued, saying, well, you can't just violate this treaty. And the court said, oh, you can't actually bring a lawsuit because you're not a state, you're not a foreign country. We're going to create this special class that has never existed before and has never been applied to anyone else since, of a domestic dependent nation. You're completely incapable of managing your affairs on your own. You have to have the U.S. help. And additionally, that means that you can't bring a lawsuit in the Supreme Court. Now, there was another suit right after that was brought by someone else who did have standing to bring a suit, and the court agreed that you can't just relocate people because you want to. Andrew Jackson, who appears on the $20 bill, said the court made its ruling, now let us see it enforce it, and then ordered the Army to forcibly relocate the remaining Indians, and that's what's known as the Trail of Tears. It was a forced death march to Oklahoma. Oklahoma being an Indian word for meaning Indian land. The entire state was supposed to be Indian land. It is now just a small section in northeast Oklahoma because the land was wanted by other people for other reasons. And but the Indian Reorganization Act took about half the Indian land away. And the reservations since then have only been, I think, somewhere around 80 million acres. Which is not very big. It may sound like a large number, but it really isn't very big. Here in California, there's one reservation that's only 3 acres. It is there are some that are incredibly small plots of land. While the Navajo have 16 million acres, they're the largest. But you know, it's kind of been one of these things. The courts even ruled at one point that the U.S. government can legally violate a treaty with an Indian nation because it wants to, but the Indian nation may not violate that treaty. It's a one-sided treaty because the court said so.
What kind of law is that?
Well, that's the law of the government that wrote the treaty that wanted to then not follow it. So you have that. You have obviously there have been a history with Africans in this country. You have, but even the Irish were discriminated against at one point. You know, so it's not limited to people of color. It is limited to whatever group is not in favor at a particular time. Eastern Europeans have been discriminated against in this country quite extensively. And last I checked, most Eastern Europeans are white. So it's just one of those things where whatever group at whatever point in history is not in favor, they get discriminated against. And the U.S. has a horrible history. It's not a good melting pot, and now you're creating more polarization within the different cultures. California, in its state constitution, has an official language, but they really won't enforce that. Yes, English is the official language, according to the California state constitution. Federally, they didn't do one. They were deciding, well, should we do French? Oh, that'll just upset the English, and we'll never be able to reconcile with them. And maybe we'll do Dutch, and they almost went with Dutch, and then just decided not to have one. But you know, California cannot enforce that because the Hispanic community would revolt, or in certain parts of California, to a much smaller degree, various Asian communities. You have groups where it's predominantly Chinese or predominantly Vietnamese or predominantly whatever. And a lot of those cultures, they come over here and they want to make a microcosm of where they came from. They want to keep the language, they want to keep the traditions, they want to keep everything else. And it's gotten to the point where it is becoming very divisive to try to say, well, let's all just assimilate and be one. And that's always been the case in this country when the government tries to force assimilation. In Amsterdam, when I was living there was a growing community. One of the requirements to get Dutch citizenship, other than being born to a Dutch national, if you become naturalized and get Dutch citizenship, you have to learn the language and you have to learn the culture. And the expectation is that you will assimilate into Dutch culture. There was a growing community there that was rebelling against that rule. And they didn't want to lose the culture. And a lot of them were second generation citizens, where it's their parents that had immigrated, and they were actually just digging in their heels. And it's creating a more divisive community, and it was upsetting a lot of Dutch people that they weren't assimilating. It was upsetting the other side because they felt that they were forced to assimilate, and they didn't want to. So I don't think that this is a truly unique American experience. This is something I believe that France had some issues with this too, and the Paris riots. I think some of that, not all of it, and I don't even know that it was the majority, but some of that was over the lack of assimilation into French culture. And as long as people are made to feel that they are forced to do something, they're more likely to dig their heels in and refuse it even more than they otherwise would. And all we're doing is creating groups. You'll notice the politicians, they'll never talk about Americans. They'll never talk about, I want to get the American vote. They'll talk about, I want to get the woman vote, or I want to get the African American vote, or I want to get this vote or that vote or this other vote. They want to divide people into different groups, because as long as the different groups are fighting each other, they're not fighting the government. They're not demanding the government be responsible for its actions, and the government gets to do whatever it wants.